Am I dead?
No.
This is not like hell or something?
No.
Then why the fuck can't I leave?
You did leave just now. Out into the stairwell, at least. You left, but you came back.
I did not.
You did. Come on.
What up YouTube, Bonsai here, back with my second YouTube video. So today I'll be starting a series I'd like to call Hidden Gem Reviews. Essentially with this series I'm going to be going over shows that I've seen recently that I thought were pretty good but didn't wind up being seen by a lot of people. So this video series is going to be basically a bunch of video essays as well as reviews to kind of highlight aspects of the show so that you might want to let you know if you want to check it out, and give people a bit of a review in case they were interested in that as well. So with that brief intro on this series out of the way, let's get into our first hidden gem review, and it's going to be on an Apple TV show called Severance. So I'd like to begin the essay portion of this video by talking a bit about who I think the intended target audience for this show is. So Severance, in my opinion, is what I would classify as a mystery thriller anthology show. So mystery thriller, I think, are two terms that most people can easily understand, but this show is also an anthology series, which does make it kind of niche when compared to most generic mystery shows. Some famous examples of anthology shows would be Netflix's Black Mirror or Philip K. Dick's Electric Dreams novel. For those of you who don't know, an anthology series like Black Mirror or Electric Dreams is a piece of medium where the writer tends to focus on a very specific premise, and they build an interesting story around exploring that premise of basically like, what if this premise was the real thing? What if this idea became a real thing? And other than the practical implications of these stories, they tend to also focus on some of the ethical issues that would arise from, like, what if this idea was a real thing that was actually done? And so it forms a very interesting kind of genre. And this show is an anthology as well as a bit of a mystery thriller in its own right. Okay, so what is the premise of the show Severance, right? So Severance, within the context of this show, is a medical procedure, and both it and its effects are what form the main conflicts around the show. And just to give you a definition, by the way, this is my own personal definition of Severance, not the definition from the show or from the writers or anything. This is just a definition I came with to help you understand what the show is about. So essentially, Severance is a procedure by which a secondary psyche is artificially created within the mind of an individual, basically giving a person multiple personality disorder or split personality disorder. And so you now have a secondary split personality within an individual that has its own separate memories and, to a certain degree, its own characteristics separate from the original, right? And this is artificially done to a person, but the idea is that you have one body with two independent personalities. Okay, so as for how this works in practice, the two personalities exist in one person, right? But they can't both simultaneously control the person. And it's also not a scenario where when one is in control, the other one is passively watching in the background. No, it's actually a case where when one is in control, they're fully in control, and the other one is completely asleep, completely dormant. So it's always like one person in control and in charge at the time. Also, unlike normal personality disorders, unlike the regular one, this one is artificially created by the company Lumen, and is thus actually regulated by Lumen Industries. So what happens is it's regulated based on their location. When they come into work, that's when the switch goes on, and then you have the work personality take charge. And when they leave work, that's when the switch goes off and their old original personality takes charge. So within the context of the show, the personality that's the work personality is called the innie, and the personality that's the original personality that lives life on the outside is called the outie. So innie and outie, basically. Okay, so that's just an explanation on the procedure of Severance itself. Bit of a long one. The rest of the show focuses on the main characters, or revolves around the main character of Mark and the people around him. So Mark is an employee at Lumen Industries, and by the time we meet him at the beginning of the show, he's actually already been severed and he's been at the job for quite some time. And so he has his reasons for wanting to undergo the procedure, but we follow him through to his work in the first episode, and we start to realize some pretty interesting things when we get there. So, as the viewer, it isn't immediately obvious when you get to Mark's place of employment what he and his colleagues are working on. You also notice that there's a small, confined group of them, and there seems to be like a huge separation between Mark's department and the other departments. Most of the other rooms around them are completely empty. So it's as if they are being purposefully isolated, and they're being forced to do this menial task that they don't really understand. And this kind of starts to form a lot of like questions in your mind, because you start to wonder, wait, hang on, if these guys are already severed and they won't remember anything when they leave, why do you have to then give them some sort of menial secret task that they aren't allowed to understand?
And we group each line of code and then sort it evenly between 5 digital buckets.
Party.
Just poke around first, use the arrows.
So it's like there's all these layers of security that Lumen seems to be piling on, and it's almost unnecessary, right? If they can't remember, then why not just let them understand, but then let them be completely clueless when they leave? But instead there's like this added layer where they aren't allowed to interact with other departments to try and piece together what they're doing, and they don't even understand what they're actually doing. So it's just like all these different mysteries that start piling on in the first episode if you pay attention, and it gets quite interesting. So yeah, that was basically an explanation on the premise of the show Severance. I'm now going to move on to start actually reviewing the show. Okay, so now moving on to talk about general plot and characters. So as you might already expect from what I've been mentioning earlier, the show does revolve heavily around finding out more about the company Lumen itself, as well as some parts of it discussing the ethics around the procedure of severance itself, as you would expect from an anthology show like this. And just to expand a bit on that, if you think about it from the perspective of the innies, right, they're essentially thrust into an unknown environment against their will. They have no say in the matter, and they're supposed to do these specific menial tasks at the behest of this company. So, they're basically slaves. They're sold by the other half of them to work for the company Lumen, and the fruits of their labor aren't even enjoyed by them, it's enjoyed by their outer self. So they just work the fields, and then these people get all the benefits. So, yeah, it's kind of an interesting new version of slavery. So, this may make you think somewhat ill or irresponsible of Mark, our main character, but he, as I said, has his understandable reasons for doing the severance procedure in the first place, though I'll admit I do personally object to his reasoning, despite understanding why he did it. And it's not just because of the whole slavery thing that I mentioned earlier, but also because he does it because of an internal pain that he's experiencing, which is a legitimate one. Though from my perspective, I see that as him running away from his, problem. He should probably confront the problem as opposed to going 8 hours a day where he doesn't have to think about it. Which, it's not healthy in my opinion. But fortunately, Mark does have a very nice arc throughout the show, and yeah, I like his character in general. I found him very favorable. I enjoyed his arc. So as the show progresses, for various reasons, Mark's personalities will, though initially reluctant or uninterested, become driven to discover the secrets of Lumen. And him, as well as the supporting cast around him, his co-workers, will be, actively trying to figure out this. And we follow both Mark's innie and outie, each with their own piece of the puzzle, trying to work it all out. But obviously they both never able to really share their knowledge with the other. But it's quite interesting to see these two aspects of the same person trying to solve the same mystery. And as for the secondary characters around Mark, generally speaking, I found them enjoyable, though they were a bit stereotypical and in some cases over the top, at least to me. But I did like them, generally speaking. Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to really explore their characters, although I think it was a purposefully done thing because the way they had the show set up. Mark is the only character that you really get to see all the aspects of him, and his other colleagues, we only really ever get to see their innie versions, so we don't know much about them. But that kind of also adds to the mystery to the show. So I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing. At the expense of us not really knowing much about them, I didn't necessarily gravitate towards them, but they were still pretty fun characters, so I enjoyed them. On that note, there are other employees of Lumen who exist in the show who are not subject to the severance procedure. And the ones we see are the ones who are Mark's supervisors. And these characters sort of form a natural antagonist for anyone who wants to discover Lumen's secrets. So it's quite interesting to also see them and understand and learn through their lens what Lumen is all about. Though I feel like their characters also weren't as carefully explored as Mark's co-workers, so I didn't quite grasp the motivation behind why they were the way they were, because unlike Mark and his co-workers who have this legitimate reason to try to piece things together, it didn't necessarily make sense to me why they were trying to keep them from not being able to piece things together. So I never quite fully understood that. But for all intents and purposes, it was fun to watch them play cat and mouse with Mark for the most part, but also his colleagues. So, as I said, like most anthology series, this show does try to explore some of the ethical ramifications of severance, and there is quite a lot of talk about it, although they didn't necessarily go into it as much as I think they could have. And for some of you who are very interested in those kind of parts of these anthology series, you might be somewhat disappointed. But even still, I think the way the show was centered, it was made to be centered around Mark and the people around him. And we're meant to follow him as his journey, as he slowly unwinds this larger conspiracy in this larger world. And so, Mark himself doesn't necessarily care. He's not too interested in these protests that are going on. And so for the time being, we don't see it. But I think as the show progresses and the story progresses and Mark becomes more and more, wanting to put himself out there, he's in this point in his life where he kind of wants to keep to himself, but he's slowly getting out of that bubble as he's working through this mystery and stuff like that. Like I said, he's having some good character development. And so as he slowly puts himself out there, I think he'll come in contact with these other elements, and I think this show has a lot of potential to grow in the future, which is another reason why I'm especially excited for it. Okay, so I just wanted to mention briefly about the aesthetics and the soundtrack of the show. But that said, this isn't a show that primarily features, CGI and music, but they are obviously important in every show. So as far as the music, personally, I am a huge fan of the main theme song of this show. It's a song that does get stuck in my head, and even when I'm not watching the show and I'm out, something might happen that might make me feel curious or whatever, and then all of a sudden I find myself playing the theme song of Severance in my head because it's pretty catchy. I mean, at least for me, I found it really nice. Other than that, the rest of the music wasn't necessarily memorable for me, but I was never distracted or annoyed whenever I heard it, and it all felt like it fit really well. So sound design was pretty a-okay. As for the general aesthetic of the show, generally speaking, most of it was set in an office setting, right, at Lumen, and most of the scenes there were very bright with a lot of light colors. And you can just tell just by looking at the screen that that place is probably air-conditioned 24/7. And when not inside Lumen, it features the town heavily. And the town is, it's a cold town. I think it's set somewhere pretty far up north. It was a place that snows for the most part. So you only ever get to see the town with like snow and cold and stuff like that. All in all, no, I think that kind of adds to the vibe of the show, because it's always like kind of cool wherever you are, and it's always kind of white wherever you are. But there are some dark scenes throughout the show, and weirdly enough, whenever these dark scenes happens, it's usually when you're exposing the underneath. Like whenever they discover something about Lumen, it's usually in a dark setting, which is kind of interesting, right? Like it's in the light that they're like hidden and they show you their best self, but you need to go to the dark to discover like the real woman. At least like that's kind of I don't know if that was the message they intended, but that's what I kind of read from it, because I kind of noticed that pattern. So I thought it was pretty good, yeah. So all in all, they did some pretty decent cinematography, pretty interesting. I'm not necessarily a fan of cold areas unless it's a Christmas movie, but I can say that it fit really well for what they were trying to do in this show. Okay, so final verdict time. All in all, I give this show a 7 out of 10, 7.5 if I'm being generous. It's not a fantastic show, but it is a good show. And it will give you a good time provided that you have a general interest in watching shows that are like this. I, for one, really like anthology shows, which is why I probably like this as much as I did. I love Black Mirror and I loved Electric Dreams. So a show like this was right up my alley. I also like, good mysteries, and despite the fact that I didn't necessarily find them as compelling characters, I did enjoy some of the quirks and stereotypes in some of the side characters. And the plot, I personally didn't find it slow, but I can understand if some people say that. But I thought it was well paced from my perspective as someone who watches these kind of shows. For what it was, I thought it was pretty well paced. And when it all culminated in the end with the finale, I felt like it was like good build up towards that final ending. And easily by the end of this year, I'm pretty sure this show is going to wind up being one of my top 10 favorite shows that I saw this year. Oh yeah, and I love the main soundtrack. It's very memorable. I downloaded it off YouTube. Yeah, another thing, like I mentioned, despite not being a fan of snowy environments, I did think that it fit the show very well. It helped add to the vibe and the eerie feeling that you got when you were watching the show. So that's my non-spoiler review of Severance, as well as my essay on why you should watch it. If you feel remotely interested, given everything I said, then go ahead and check it out. It's a good show, I guarantee it. And as for me, I'm going to end this video here. If you like the video, go ahead and like the video on YouTube. If you feel like subscribing to my channel, please do. I promise to have more videos coming out every week. Well, one video coming out every week. And with that, this is Bonsai signing out. Catch you all later.